Cash Flow Diary Podcast, episode 127.
Welcome to yet another exciting episode of the Cash Flow Diary Podcast, the podcast that teaches you insider tips, tactics, and strategies for creating leverage streams of cash flow into your life. Learn from top-performing entrepreneurs, business owners, investors, and thought leaders from across the globe as they share their secrets to success. Like what you learn on this and other Cash Flow Diary podcast episodes? Go to learninvestingnow.com and sign up to receive powerful tips and information that will help you succeed as an entrepreneur and investor. Now, here's your host, investor, entrepreneur, business owner, educator, speaker, author, and master facilitator of Robert Kiyosaki's cash flow game, Jay Massey.
All right, and welcome to another episode of the Cash Flow Diary Podcast. I am your host, Jay Massey. And you know what? I am excited because today's guest is going to cover yet one of those essential skills. We've been talking about essential skills for a while now, and there are many essential skills. You probably have figured that out. We've talked about, being flexible. We talked about communications. We've talked about sales. We've talked about a lot of different things. And guess what? I think today's expert is going to be able to help you refine that essential skill even better. Because Maggie Patterson is a copywriter and communication strategist. She works hands-on with entrepreneurs to help them market their business using content and communication strategies along with copy that converts. And that is a key word, my friends. Copy that converts to meet business goals. She has 15 years of hands-on experience, and she's worked with companies of all sizes, from big brands to solopreneurs. That means you. After cutting her teeth during the dot-com bubble and burst in Canada at one of Canada's leading PR agencies, she started her own highly successful marketing communications consultancy. Here's some of the websites that she has been featured on. Let's see how many you've visited. The Huffington Post, Virgin.com, LKR Social Media, Duct Tape Marketing, Content Marketing Institute, and Yahoo Small Business. Keep this in mind. What you are about to hear is probably a whole lot of things that you go, man, I know I should have done that already. But more importantly, I'm going to ask you at the end, have you done it? And most importantly, I'm going to tell you to go get it done. Welcome, if you will, though, Miss Maggie Patterson.
Thank you so much for having me, Jay. I'm totally stoked to talk about this stuff today.
Well, you should be, because it looks as though you've done a lot of it. And I know one of the most important things for, at least for me in my journey, it has been a challenge to learn how to communicate that which I do. I learned from Jim Palmer. He said something very similar. He said to learn to become a marketer of what I do, not just a doer or a technician behind what I do. And that transition has been a challenge. And I'm assuming that that's something you've run into at least once.
I think, even with myself, I've run into it. I see it almost every single day with my community, with my clients. They're really good at saying what they do, but they don't really get to the result. They don't really get to that kind of feeling that they create for their clients. Like, if you're selling hats, you're not selling hats, you're selling style. In my case,
Yes.
I sell communications, but really what I'm selling is permission and confidence for you to tell your story to your community in a way that really works for you.
Absolutely. Now, as many people have heard me say before, and I say again, and I therefore must ask you, I look at today's entrepreneurs a whole lot like yesterday's superheroes. I don't know if in Canada you had a separate superhero group from, say Superman or Spider-Man or Wonder Woman or what have you. But here's what I do know. Nearly every superhero didn't start out that way. Before they put on their tights and their capes and started swooping around and saving people, they were normal individuals who maybe got bit by a spider or hit by a rock or jumped in a vat of, oil or something and came out super and decided to use that power for good. One of the things that I would love to know is, before you were going around helping entrepreneurs finally figure out what their story was, let alone how to tell it, what is it that is the real Maggie Patterson?
The real Maggie Patterson is literally, since I was like a little kid, I always kind of had two talents. I could always write and I could always tell stories. And it's only now, since I hit 40 and I have all these years of experience in working in the industry, I realize that that is not something that comes easily for a lot of people. Communicating, figuring out what to say and when to say it is challenging. And so the real Maggie Patterson is just, a chick who's spent a lot of time working on this. I'm a wife, I'm a mom, I garden, I scrapbook. I'm not very exciting when you look at those things. I'm kind of very boring and domesticated. But, I do have this real superpower for getting to the heart of like, what kind of things do you need to be talking about? How do you pull this all together? And really kind of making people feel confident about this logical flow. One of the biggest things I see with entrepreneurs is they don't really understand how their backstory connects to where they are today. So they start to always tell this kind of really routine, well, I quit my job story. And it's like, yeah, well, we all quit our job. Let's be a little more engaging here.
Oh, yeah. I love it. I love it. Well, I didn't have a job, but I hear you.
Yeah, like we all quit something to do what we're doing today. So,
Indeed.
No matter what that is, like how do you actually stand out and kind of cut through all that noise? I mean, anyone can say that. What's the thing you can say that no one else says or that makes you interesting and engaging? And in my case, that happens to be story. For someone else, that might be real estate investing so how do you really kind of bring that out with your own unique flavor?
Okay. So let's talk about this because this is a very huge subject. I get a lot of my clients, either personally or group or private, whatever we're doing, or people just generally interested in building cash flow, real estate investing, what have you. They're excellent technicians. They go to the books, the tapes, the seminars, the CDs, MP3s, all the stuff, which is great at teaching them the technical skill, which is wonderful. You need that to actually do the work. However, if nobody comes through your door, your store is empty. And how do you take that mindset, that person? How do you do that and go and teach that person to be able to go, okay, here's the process of how to break it down so that you can grab people's attention and bring them over to your store?
So, I think this is such a good question because we learn how to do social media. We learn how to, create a press release or whatever it is, a newsletter. And we have the skills to do those things. They're not, once you kind of learn the way it works, it's not challenging. So you start doing those things and then you realize like, well, no one's reading this. Like I'm blogging and nothing's happening. And, it's because you're building a house. Like you've basically built the second story of your house without putting in a basement. And I realize like if you're in California, you don't have a basement, but you haven't built a good solid foundation.
Right.
And, really the easiest way to think of it is storytelling and messaging is that foundation for everything you do in marketing. So when you skip ahead, it's very, very shaky and it might not work. So, starting to look at that overall message and story, look at there's 4 kind of functional areas, looking at your customer, what they actually need from you and what's that message? How can you connect with them? What are they struggling with? Looking at your own personal experiences and how you can start to pull those in. And it doesn't always have to be this epic hero journey. It can be as simple as creating these like relatable moments where people go, yeah, I can totally feel you on that. Looking at how things you've done, like the successes you have brought, the work you've done for your client, how can you really showcase them and turn them into the hero? And the last part is, if you think of the people who are most dynamic and they have so much charisma, it comes down to they're willing to take a stand. Anyone can be wishy-washy and play it safe, but what are the things that you feel so passionate about that you are willing to be bold and brazen and really step up and take ownership of them and say like, yes, this is what I believe, this is what I stand for, and this is what so much of my work is built on and my approach to how I show up in the world.
I agree with you, especially on that last point, because I think what happens, and I could be wrong, and I'd love to hear your thoughts, is when we take that stand, we run the risk of alienating some, and that we don't know if that some that we're alienating is the person who would give us that first that they'd be our first client or that first person that buy a house from or sell to, et cetera, et cetera. And I think there's a lot of fear that's driven between doing exactly what you said.
Yeah, I think it's very, very scary, but no one ever is successful by playing it safe. And, this is the classic thing. When I say to someone, what's your target market? They say small businesses. I'm like, what? That's not a target market. Let's talk about how you're going to niche that down into a very small specific group. With the sheer magnitude of the world and the internet, you cannot talk and connect to everyone. So you have to be willing to say, I'm willing to let that group go.
Right.
Because if they don't vibe with my jam, fine, goodbye. Not everyone's going to like everything you say. Trying to be friends with everyone is just too hard.
Oh, I feel like you are a long lost relative right now in so many ways, because we're preaching the same message. Because I think, like, for example, a lot of those of you who are listening right now, you get confused. You hear one day I should do this strategy in real estate, and then I should do this strategy in real estate. And you won't let one of them or all of them, except the one you know best, go by the wayside. And you end up trying to chase 12 rabbits at the same time, and it doesn't work. So, Maggie, let me ask you this. When you're working with someone new, what's usually how do they come to the realization that they're like, I need help?
Honestly, I think two things generally happen with my audience is, number one, someone like a coach will say, that's it, you need help. Like literally they are like told, they are like cut off cold turkey. They're like, you can't do anything else until you get this stuff sorted out. Or the second one is, I find that most of my clients, when they come to me, they've been listening to my podcast, they've been reading my blog content, they, connecting with me on social media, and they're seeing me in action. They're really getting a feel for who I am and the type of work I do, and they like my style. They appreciate that I'm direct and honest, and that's what attracts them. There's plenty of people I know don't like what I have to say, and that's fine. I can still sleep at night. Right. So really at that point, they realize, they're like, oh, yeah, like I'm not feeling super secure in what I'm putting out there. I'm not confident in the message I have, or I'm really just kind of unclear and muddled. And a lot of times I think the easiest things to say is they're wishy-washy.
I love it. You are like, you speak the same way that I do. It's just very clear, very matter of fact, and it is just refreshing to hear. So let me ask you this. I've heard many slogans, and I'm sure many entrepreneurs have heard this too, and I would love to hear from someone who is a masterful storyteller why this is so important. Because when you go out there to try to do some marketing, the first thing that I know I always struggle with is I start trying to think about the features. And we all know, and here's it is, facts tell, stories sell. I would love to know if I'm that person who's got a business or hopefully thinking that an idea would be great, what is the first way I should learn to tell my story?
Oh, I think, if you're looking at something like an actual program, service, you're actually going to sell something with a story, I think the absolute first thing you have to understand is how storytelling works. Okay. Storytelling is, I think we throw this idea around, we read it, we see it in blog posts, but I think that we don't really understand why it works. And it's pure brain chemistry. Okay. How stories function in our brain is so different than how we receive logic. If you think back to when you're a kid, and if you have kids, you've seen this happen. We learn shapes, we learn numbers, we learn all these different patterns. Stories are a pattern that our brain recognizes. So when you start to tell stories, the brain all of a sudden perks up and goes, wait a second, I know this. And, when you communicate with facts, there's only two parts of the brain being activated, where when you start telling stories, multiple parts of the brain get into the game. Like if you're talking about someone running, all of a sudden the motor cortex is activated and they go, oh, wait. And the more parts of the brain we start to stimulate with that story, the more memorable it becomes, the more of the imagination we can engage. And it's fascinating when you start to look at all the science of this, and I'm so nerdy about it, but I love knowing why things work. And this works because ultimately it creates imagination. And if that story sticks long enough, we start to think of it as being real. We start to fill in blanks. And that's why you can remember someone's story of when they're a kid so much more than you can remember the benefit of the product they're selling. People are going to bond with the story. So if you're going to try to sell someone something, the fastest way to overcome their objections is to warm them up with a story, to get them open to receiving your message.
Wow. I've never heard anyone explain it, and I've just heard many people say it, and obviously we've been using it, but we don't often understand the power behind the tools that we received. The idea of stories being a pattern is actually kind of interesting, because if it's a pattern, it can be duplicated, replicated, most importantly. All right, so then let me ask this question. Are there types of stories in your world? Like, you use this type of story to achieve XYZ objective versus this type of story to, do something else?
Honestly, I think that's a really good question. It's something I personally am working in my business to kind of create these like archetypal type stories, because especially as entrepreneurs, small business owners, people who want to improve cash flow, the number one story people tend to talk about is this like hero's journey, this inspirational tale of my rags to riches story. And I think that if you're someone who's had a pretty, uninteresting middle-class upbringing like I did, that becomes very intimidating. You're like, oh, I can't compete with that. I didn't pull myself out of the gutter. So, I think that then you start to think, well, I can't tell stories. So I think that it's really important. I always like to think of stories in two ways. There's stories that inspire, and there's stories that people can relate to. And we all have stories people can relate to. When I tell a story of how excited I am that my son, who's just so particular about certain things, he's going to wear a shirt with buttons to the Christmas concert. I know there's someone in my community who's like, oh my gosh, my son too. He hates buttons. It's such a real human moment. And I think that stop thinking of stories as like epic tales. Start thinking of it as like that little bit of color and slice of life that people can relate to that makes you human.
So that's kind of like the difference between maybe a Greek Odyssey versus an Aesop's fable. That's what
exactly. And I think the other thing with stories is, they've shown it time and time again. You need to give people what they expect with a story, because it's a pattern. They expect a happy ending. So when we are starting to tell stories that are negative, we need to end on a high note, or you're really leaving a bad taste in your audience's mouth. Think of a movie that ends without the right resolution, how that makes you feel. You never want people to feel that way when they are consuming your content or speaking with you. You need to leave them happy.
I wish you hadn't said think of a movie, because M. Night Shyamalan just came to my mind and won't leave, because he's had such a consistent string of doing what you just said that it was just so easy for me to remember that. That's unfortunate for him. Anyway, we move on. Now, when it comes to the idea, because I've told a lot of people, the way to quote unquote dominate your market, especially today's game, is to educate them first. Because as I know for myself, as a real estate guy, if I'm ever raising capital, ever doing a deal, there's such an educational process that's required. It's mandated. So I was like, well, might as well turn it into marketing pieces. And there's this whole concept of content marketing. For those who may not be familiar with what that is, how do you see what that looks like? And most importantly, how does one actually do it?
So probably the easiest way to think of content marketing is you're using content to educate and inform people. And by educating and informing them, you're creating trust, and then they, they're more apt to do business with you, because they understand that you are a subject matter expert, that you are someone that really knows their stuff, and that you can deliver value, because there's this automatic idea. You think, oh, if they're giving me that for free, what would they give me if I was paying them? Mind blowing, right? So content marketing really is just kind of a system for you using your marketing, where we're moving away from this kind of sell, pushing facts at people, and really focusing more on providing a lot of value and injecting stories into that. We talk a lot about blogging. We talk a lot about creating different forms of content to engage with our audience. Those are the perfect places to start to put in these kind of like micro stories and these things people can relate to. So it's not just, here's my top 5 list of things. It's like, here's my top 5 list of things, and let me make this a little more interesting for you so you actually remember it.
Keyword on the remember it part. So are you trying to tell me that I got to have a website?
Well... We just talked about this. So
I
confession, I did not have a website until 2013.
Right.
And that was just honestly the nature of my business. My story around my business at that time was it was built on referrals. I didn't need a website. I was full all the time. And it was only when I started to kind of change my business and start to really focusing on growing it that I was like, yeah, okay, I do need a website. But I took a lot of time, and I encourage people to do this, is don't get into the I'm going to put up a website trap. Really think about what's the story you are telling with your website. Everything on your website, the words, the look, the feel, the colors, everything tells a story about you and your business. So you want to make sure that if you're going to put yourself out there, that you are telling the right story.
Okay, so you just said something that I know everyone's thinking right now. How do I know if it's the right story?
Well, there's, the right story. There's going to be right stories for different stages in your business. Your story is going to evolve over time. A story is not static. So maybe the story you're going to start off telling is talking about a very specific part of what you're doing. And then you're going to realize, oh, people have an appetite for more. But I think, when you start to think at the very basic level about your website, the biggest thing is start to think about how you want people to feel when they're interacting with you. What is that kind of desired feeling? Do you want them to feel warmth? Do you want them to feel like you're approachable? Are you bold? Are you, what is it that you want them to feel? Because that kind of stake in the ground is what sets the pace for everything beyond that. And if they show up at your website and it's hot pink, that's sending a very different message. Your website's gray.
I'm going to do my best to not have a hot pink website anytime soon. But I hear exactly what you're saying. It's funny how true this is. I mean, I have a guy on my team who totally agonizes over every icon, every color, every box, I'm just like, okay, you know what you're doing more than I do, but it's funny how these little things get translated in various different ways in that sense. So, but I have a question.
Sure.
When you start talking about content marketing, that's just so much. I mean, you could. So, are we talking YouTube? Are we talking social media? What are we really talking when it comes down to it? Because that sounds like way more work than just going out there to find a new person to work with.
Yeah, it honestly is. But I think you need to think about content marketing as the way your business can scale. I mean, yeah, you can find people one-on-one, person to person by person. But if you want to build something that is bigger and bolder, content marketing is your way to do that, because you ultimately, at some point in your business, right, we get into this, you're bound by time, you're bound by that whole idea of trading time for dollars. So if there's going to be scale in your business and you're going to start to bring more people and grow your audience, content marketing is what's going to give you that leverage. So it is, I will never tell you, content marketing is A, not fast, and B, if you are impatient, it is the wrong option for you. But it is truly the way marketing is going. It is because content is the starting point for everything else you do. You can do social media, but if you're not doing content marketing to have a really clear plan on the types of content you're producing, if you're doing blogging without that, it's all going to just kind of be disjointed. Content marketing is like the roadmap for the direction you're going to go in, and lets you figure out the right things to create, really tap into what your audience needs and go from there, versus like, hey, I'm blogging. It's like, well, what are you blogging about?
I don't know. I'm just blogging because somebody said that that's what I should do. And what's interesting is you mention it as a complete strategy. In keywords, it is not exactly the fastest strategy on the planet, but I love the word you said. It's about scale. If you're looking to scale the business, it's a good way to make that happen. So what is your go-to strategy when it comes to working with a client and helping them get up and running as quickly as humanly possible? What does that typically look like for you?
Are you tired of letting good cash flow generating ideas go to waste? Go to cashflowdiary.com/ready to apply for a complimentary, yes, that means free, one-on-one breakthrough session. Take action now. Go to cashflowdiary.com/ready. Again, that's cashflowdiary.com/ready. Before we get back to today's episode of the Cash Flow Diary podcast, your host, Jay Massey, has some important insights to share with you.
All right. I don't know if you were enjoying this Essential Skills Set series or what, but here's what I do know. Today's my birthday, and that's it. That's all I got to say on that one. Let's get back to the interview.
I've been running as fast as humanly possible, which is the case of pretty much everyone I ever work with, because everyone's like, this must be done now. I'm like, oh, settle down. So I really approach my approach to content marketing is really kind of based on 3 pillars. It's based on the pillar of story, then content, then promotion. So if you look at it kind of as a triangle, is that base of the pyramid is always going to be story. So we really spend a lot of time figuring out, what their audience needs, all those different elements of story we've talked about. Then we move into content. So when I talk about content is what type of content are we going to create? What's the most appropriate vehicle for you and your personality? If you hate video, why are we going to do video? Maybe you need to be doing a podcast, or maybe you're a fantastic writer. Really play to your strengths and go from there. I think it's so easy, especially with our content and promotion, to get trapped in this shoulds. Well, so-and-so said I should. Oh, that works for my competitor. Well, maybe that's not going to work for you. So, we're not making cookies. This is not a little factory of gingerbread men that all look the same. We're all going to have different sprinkles and be different shapes. And, we need to really kind of embrace that, our singular personality into that. So figure out the right type of content. And then once we've done that part, kind of the top of the pyramid is promotion, is figuring out how we're going to get your message out there. If you're going to use social media, what specific platforms are we going to use? How are we going to do that? What kind of content are we going to put into those platforms? Are you going to blog? Are you going to podcast? How does that all fit together? How are we getting all these messages and stories and content pushed out into the world?
This is
so
starting.
It's a lot. It doesn't happen overnight.
Yeah. I get all that, and I guess in some instances, it feels overwhelming, and I'm just sitting here thinking about the journey and the process, and how each one of those things are things that we've added slowly over time.
Yeah.
Keyword being slowly over time, and yet at the same time, as you said, as an entrepreneur, we've got this feeling, it's got to be done now, yesterday. It's got to all be right there and accessible. How can we do that quickly? And this is just not the method for doing so. Now, one of the things that you were mentioning earlier is that you were saying we had to be aware of how we wanted to show up for our clients, how we wanted to, present ourselves. I guess, for lack of a better way of putting it, I would call that the brand image. Was that similar to what you're saying, or is there more?
Yeah, no, I would definitely say that's, figuring out kind of what your brand is. And I think the word brand is kind of this big, scary thing. You're like, because we think of like Coca-Cola, and it's like, well, take the same principles of Coca-Cola or Walmart or whatever big brand you want to pick, and think about, how do they make you feel? Why do they always use consistent colors? What kind of language do they always use? Because you start with your brand to set this, create this set of expectations. And that really provides a guidebook for the way you communicate. Like, I know in my brand, we've started using a lot of very specific types of photography. So it almost gets to the point where when you see that piece of content, you automatically can attach, oh yeah, that's from Maggie, or that's from so-and-so. What is the brand experience you create for people? And I think that part of that brand experience, part of the story we tell as part of a brand is not just at the part we attract people into working with us. It's like, once they're in our business, what do any materials they get from us? What kind of gifts do we send? How do we interact with them? How do we correspond with people by email? That's all part of our story. And I think a lot of times we forget that. We're really good at getting people in the door, and then we kind of drop the ball in terms of what that brand experience is.
Shh, don't tell everybody.
Yeah, I think if you can do that internal piece, once people are into your business really well, that's how you get super fans that are with you for life.
Right. Right. Super fans. I like that. If we could only go find all of the, let me just go get 100 super fans. I'll be good. That's
Yeah,
really
and
what I'm after.
I mean, if you can get them in the door and nurture them and love them up, I mean, they will be super fans.
Interesting. Now, going through this journey, at least for myself, there have been so many strategies, so many people coming to me saying, Jay, we need to do this. We got to do this. And one of the things that we haven't done, too well, or if frequently at all, but yet, and I like, what you have to say, as this is press releases. It's not something I even know how to leverage, let alone do too well. And yet you prefer social media. Help me understand why that might be.
Oh, goodness. We're going to talk about the press releases. I'll try to not get all ornery about it.
That's okay. Hey, there's probably someone right now who's going, okay, what I need to do is that I'm working on my app and I'm going to send out this press release and the world is just going to know and life is going to be great.
Yeah, here's the thing with press releases. This is not to boastful. This is straight up factual information. I have probably written thousands, done media campaigns around thousands more press releases. And the reality is the press release is a really kind of retro tool. And the reason we fall into doing it tends to be because when it comes to contacting the media or getting, quote, our message out there, that is the tool we all know about. We all kind of have this vague idea of you use a press release. And there's a lot, it's a very, very static, boring tool to be using in 2015 when the reality is we have social media, we can blog. It was great in 1999 when the internet was brand new, but we don't need to do that anymore. And the perfect example is, I brought up the example of Coke a few minutes ago. Coke is not issuing press releases anymore. They are phasing them out. When you look at how big brands are doing their storytelling now and sharing their stories and getting their news out there, they're using what's called brand journalism. So how can they be that internal journalist within their own brand? You don't have to rely on getting in the Wall Street Journal anymore to get your message out there. And that's not to say traditional media is dead. I don't believe that by a long shot, but your message is going to be so much more effective if you're doing it on a one-to-one basis. So if you want to get in touch with a key reporter at your local news station, build a relationship with them and send them a pitch email that's really short and sweet, summarizing versus this really kind of boring, canned press release that feels super impersonal.
I'm sensing you don't like press releases. I'm just guessing.
I have absolutely no use for them. I think there are very, very few times and places where they actually are useful. And generally for entrepreneurs, they're not. They're kind of a waste of time and paper. Unless you are a publicly traded company that has to disclose it for the stock exchange, you're in a crisis communication situation, and you're a high profile company, which is in the media, and that's the best way to get the information out. I really don't believe it's necessary anymore. And you are talking to a woman who's made a lot of money doing press releases over the years.
Nah, understood. Well, anything that you can do to help me, the normal entrepreneur, be able to avoid the challenges that we typically face would be great. And it sounds as though that this is one particular strategy that we need to definitely put on the wayside. So when we're getting on the social media and other platforms, what do you say there? I mean, you realize that every time you say don't do this but do this, we're always faced with the same challenge of, well, how do I communicate there? You say blog, okay, cool. How do I communicate there? Well, video, guess what? I got to communicate there. This is a constant issue.
Yes, the easiest way to solve this problem?
Yes.
Figure out where your people are. And if you have a big, big target audience, you need to get very, very narrow to figure out where they are. So your business you could find out that, hey, my typical client is a woman this age. Hey, what social networks do they hang out on? Oh, they're on Pinterest and Facebook. So instead of you trying to spend all your time eating the elephant, trying to be on Google Plus where your audience isn't, get really, really clear. If one of your goals is, let's say you're an author and you really want to mainstream your stuff, starting with pitching the Today Show is probably a little bit crazy. Why don't you start getting some experience working with your local media as a commentator on different things? If you were like a CPA, you could be talking about tax trends for 2015, and start to build those relationships so you can get the experience you need to go to that next level with mainstream media. I mean, the worst thing I've ever seen is someone who shows up to do like what they call a double ender interview. So, it's one of those ones where someone's in a remote studio. They've never done any sort of media interview, and all of a sudden they've blown it because they have no idea what the experience is of getting mic'd up and trying to speak in sound bites. I mean, get some experience and test as you go. I think that, you don't have to be stuck on it being right. It doesn't have to be right this second. Not everything we do is going to be perfect. So start to test, start to crack, get some experience, figure out if that's the right thing for you. I have a client who just, we were talking earlier today about speaking, and she's done a lot of speaking recently. And she's like, I don't really want to do this. I'm like, fine, let's not do it. Sometimes you have to do it to realize it's not the right fit for you and your audience.
Right. Now, interestingly enough, something you said that I think is very important. I've often told people that you do your first deals for experience, not profit, and then later you get the profit from your experience. And it sounds like you're saying that same thing, which leads me to ask this question. When you were in corporate America for a while, and then you make this switch. How was that transition? Because I'm just in my head, I'm going, well, for most people, the first thing that we end up struggling with is getting new clients. But I'm guessing that was probably not your issue.
So, my kind of entrepreneurial quitting story is quite hilarious because I'm in Canada where I live. We have a year-long maternity leave. So I was working in a PR agency. I was managing these, big multi-million-dollar accounts. I was traveling all the time. And I was like, you know what? I don't really want to do this anymore. So from the second I got pregnant, I was plotting and planning. And I literally packed up my office when I went on maternity leave. And I said, oh, I know office space is at a premium. Just, if you need to use my office, it's fine. And I never set foot back in that office. They pushed me to come back early and I quit. I didn't have a plan. I didn't have any clients really, but I was just kind of like, you know what? I'm smart. I'll figure it out. And within 6 weeks, I had a full client roster just because the quality of the work I'd done, the personal relationships, the reputation I had. So I think that a lot of times if you're going to make that leap, you need to really make sure that you've done that foundational piece where people know, like, and trust you already.
Well, okay. And I get that. That's if you're going to stay in the same industry. But for most of the time, that's not the case. What if I'm going to switch industries because I just don't want to do whatever it is that I'm doing ever again? And this new shiny object over here looks really, really nice. And I would love to go play with that. What do you do then?
I think in that case, a good transition plan is good. I've said to many people over the years, quitting your job with no clients is a really bad idea. It causes a lot of strain and stress. I mean, if you have the financial means to do it, I think that's wonderful, but that's not the reality for the bulk of people. So I think that if you're going into a totally new industry, have a transition plan in place where you can start to build those foundational elements that you are a bit of a known entity before you burst on the scene and say, hello, here I am, your money. People need to be warmed up before they hand over their PayPal account or write you a big check.
Yeah, that's very extremely true. So what would you say if this person is, they got a checklist right now, or they're thinking about, I don't earn what I want to earn. I don't like the hours I work. I'm just dissatisfied with my work environment.
Yeah.
Whatever. What would you say from your viewpoint? How does one put themselves in a position so that they have a story to tell, when it comes time for them to exit? What are some of the things that we could do now before that make or break moment to make sure that we are ready, we are in position?
probably one of the most powerful things is, and then we touched on this earlier, but is understanding the needs of your clients. I think that we tend to make, especially if we're going to a new industry, we're excited, we get carried away in kind of our own hype. And we lose sight of what people actually need from us. So, taking the time to do even like discovery type interviews to really talk to people that would be potential clients and understand what their pain points are. Talking to people who know you really well to understand what kind of your unique values are. A tool I absolutely love, and I think everyone should do this. It's called the Fascinate test. You can go to howtofascinate.com. And what that does is tells you how the world sees you. Instead of like a Myers-Briggs type test, it'll tell you like what kind of the lens you look at. I think understanding those kinds of things are great foundational pieces to getting to your story. I don't think it's a matter of sitting down pen to paper and saying, okay, I'm ready for my story. It's like, it's not all about you. It's about how you can serve and what you can show up and the legacy, the impact you can have on the world. So, start by doing some homework first and getting clear on what that all means when you put it together.
Excellent. Excellent. Could you repeat that website again? Because I know it went by quickly for somebody and they're going, I missed it.
It's howtofascinate.com. And there's actually a book, so you could just go over to Amazon and look for that. But it is an incredibly powerful exercise. I use it with my clients all the time, and it's actually taught me a lot about my clients and how I need to serve them.
Interesting. Love it. So with that being said, let me ask this. What would you say to that person who's considering getting started in business, but possibly is just afraid? They want to put on their superhero uniform, probably for the first time, and they're just wondering, can I, should I don't have everything in place. What would you say to that person?
Oh, don't be fooled. None of us have it all figured out. Seriously, I think it's very easy to look at everyone's shiny outsides.
Right.
The slick, the slick headshots and the really professional websites and all these years of experience. Don't look at someone who's so much further along in their journey and say, oh, I'll never get there. The reality is you don't know what's going on behind the scenes. I can guarantee you, as someone who's on the inside of many businesses, things are not always as shiny as they look. And, give yourself some credit and just know that there is a reason you are doing this, and don't get stuck in this idea of, comparing your beginning to someone else's middle or their end. That compare and despair trap is really, really, it's so prevalent. I think it's so easy to get trapped in that and be like, oh, but I can't. It's like, no, you can. And you need to understand, what is the unique value and why are you doing this?
Wow. Well said. I love that. Hopefully you guys have listened and learned a lot today. Thank you, Maggie, for taking the time to invest here with the Cash Flow Diary audience.
Thank you so much for having me. And, I would love to connect with you guys. So feel free to hit me up over on my website or on Twitter at Mags Patterson.
Excellent. And don't you also have a podcast they should hear?
Oh, yeah. If you want bite-sized marketing advice in a very direct style, and if you've listened this long, you probably can handle listening to me. As my husband says, people actually listen to that.
Right.
But that's because he has to listen to me all the
time. Right. They're choosing to. That's a completely different thing.
Yeah. So it's the Marketing Moxie Show, and you can find it over on Stitcher and iTunes.
Excellent. Again, thanks for taking the time to be here. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, you know what time it is? It's time for you to move at the speed of instruction. What does that mean? That means maybe howtofascinate.com is the first place you need to go, but I think it's MaggiePatterson.com, because at the end of the day, you've heard information and you need more of it so that you can go out there, become the bigger, better, badder investor you were born to be, and today is the day to make it happen. We do our best to bring you the information, knowledge, experience, and resources required to make these things happen for you. So now it's up to you to go do it. I look forward to talking to you soon. Until next time.